The wind was a living, malevolent thing, tearing at her clothes, scouring her skin with ice crystals. She stumbled through the white oblivion, each breath a gasp of frozen air, each step a desperate gamble against unseen holes and drifts. Fear had long since curdled into a cold, numb dread, a certainty that the prairie, vast and indifferent under a summer sky, was a deadly, hungry maw in winter's grip. Her hands were useless claws, her face a mask of rime. The world was reduced to the shriek of the storm and the frantic pounding in her own chest. She had lost the path hours ago, maybe days. Time had ceased to have meaning. Only the biting cold and the endless, blinding white remained. Her legs gave out. She fell, striking something hard beneath the snow. A rock, perhaps, or frozen earth. The pain was a brief, sharp clarity before the numb returned. Lying there, buried in the drift, the sound of the wind seemed to lessen, or maybe it was just her hearing fading. She closed her eyes, the weight of the snow a heavy blanket, oddly comforting in its finality. This was it. The end of the road, the end of the fear, the end of the gnawing emptiness that had driven her blindly, aimlessly, across the unforgiving land. A shift in the wind, or a momentary lull, brought another sound. A low, guttural growl? No, a voice. Deep, rough, barely audible over the gale. A figure emerged from the swirling snow, large and indistinct, like a wraith shaped by the storm itself. It stopped, silhouetted against the white chaos, and stared down at her. She couldn't make out features, just a looming presence, dark against the white. Fear, dormant for a moment, surged back, cold and sharp. Who was this? Another lost soul? Or something worse? The figure knelt, its movements slow, deliberate. A large hand, rough and weathered, reached out and brushed snow from her face. The touch was surprisingly gentle, but the hand was calloused, strong. It felt like the hand of the land itself, rough and unyielding. She flinched but couldn't pull away. A face, framed by a dark hood or hat, came closer. Eyes dark and assessing met hers. There was no pity in them, not exactly, but a deep, quiet understanding of the harshness of things. He said something else, the words lost to the wind again, but the tone was not threatening. He moved behind her, careful hands lifting her. She was light, fragile, barely there. He lifted her into his arms, cradling her against a chest that felt solid and warm beneath layers of rough fabric and hide. The movement jarred her, bringing a fresh wave of pain and dizziness. She buried her face in his coat, the scent of wood smoke and pine a sudden, overwhelming comfort after the sterile, cutting cold. He turned, and through the swirling snow, she thought she saw the vague shape of something large and dark, a horse. He carried her, his steps steady and unhurried, through the relentless storm. The cold still bit, but his body was a shield against the worst of it. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the rhythm of his steps, the beat of his heart against her ear, the strange, unexpected safety of being held by a complete stranger in the heart of the blizzard. He brought her to a small, squat cabin, barely visible against the snow-covered slope. Inside, it was dim but blessedly warm, the air thick with the scent of burning wood and something cooking, like stew or beans. He lowered her gently onto a cot near the fire, the springs protesting with a low creak. She lay there, wrapped in blankets he had pulled from a chest, watching him through half-closed eyes. He was tall and broad, his movements economical and efficient. He removed his outer layers, revealing a man whose face was weathered and lined, his expression habitually grave. His hands, she noted again, were large and capable as he banked the fire, checked the pot on the hearth, and moved about the small space. He didn't speak to her, not at first. He simply saw to the necessary things of the fire, the food, the closing of the door against the storm's fury. He poured something hot into a tin mug and brought it to her. "Drink," he said, his voice as rough and quiet as before. It was weak tea, but warm and sweet with a hint of honey. She managed a few sips, the liquid a slow, spreading warmth in her chest. He watched her, his dark eyes steady, unreadable. She felt exposed, vulnerable, lying there under his gaze. Who was he? Why had he saved her? He didn't press her for answers, didn't ask her name or where she had come from. He simply let her be, a silent, watchful presence. The storm howled outside, a constant reminder of the world she had almost perished in, the world that had stripped her of everything. In here, though, in this small, isolated cabin, there was a stillness, a quiet sanctuary. She watched him eat his meal in silence, the clink of the spoon the only sound besides the wind and the crackling fire. He cleaned up, then sat by the fire, whittling a piece of wood with a large knife. He seemed content in the silence, in his own company. She realized this was likely how he lived, alone, self-sufficient, beholden to no one. It was a life starkly different from the one she had known, one she had lost. The fear had receded, replaced by a profound weariness and a hesitant, fragile sense of safety. But the questions remained, unspoken, hanging in the warm, quiet air. Who was he, this man who had pulled her from the jaws of the storm? And what would happen when the snow finally stopped falling? Days blurred into a quiet routine. The storm raged for another day and a night, burying the cabin under drifts that reached the eaves. She stayed on the cot, weak and bruised, watching him. His name, she learned in the fewest possible words, was Elias. He didn't offer it. She had to ask, her voice a dry whisper. He responded with just the name, no embellishment. He worked methodically, chopping wood from a small pile inside the cabin, tending the fire, cooking simple meals of stew and bread, caring for her with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice in solitary survival. He changed the dressing on her bruised leg, his touch still gentle but firm. He brought her water, made her eat. He didn't hover, didn't demand conversation. He respected her silence, her need to heal, physically and perhaps in other ways he couldn't know. Slowly, tentatively, she began to move more. She could sit up, swing her legs off the cot. The cabin was Spartan. A table, 2 chairs, the cot, a narrow bunk built into the wall where Elias slept, a small stove, shelves with basic supplies. Everything was clean, orderly, used with care. She watched him as he went about his tasks, his focused gaze as he sharpened a tool, the strength in his hands as he lifted heavy logs, the way his shoulders relaxed slightly when he sat by the fire in the evenings, reading from a worn book. He wasn't imposing or frightening once the initial shock wore off. He was simply present, reliable. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with the sounds of the cabin, the storm outside, and the unspoken communication of shared space and growing, hesitant trust. She began to contribute in small ways, folding the blankets, tidying her space, eventually helping with the simple chores he allowed her to do, stirring the pot, sweeping the floor with a brush made of bound twigs. He never asked her to, she just did it. He acknowledged her efforts with a brief nod, a slight softening around his eyes. He still didn't ask about her past, and she offered nothing. The reasons she was alone, why she was out on the prairie in a storm, remained locked inside her. But the desperate edge of fear was fading, replaced by a quiet determination. She was not the same girl who had collapsed in the snow. Survival, and Elias's quiet, steady presence, was hardening her, shaping her into something new. One afternoon, while the sun finally broke through the clouds, turning the snowdrifts into blinding white sculptures, she saw him watching her as she kneaded dough for bread. His gaze was assessing, not intrusive. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden or a lost waif. She felt like a person capable and present. A fragile connection was forming between them, built not on words or shared history, but on mutual observation, quiet respect, and the simple, profound act of one person offering shelter and survival to another. The outside world, though temporarily subdued by the clear sky, still loomed. She knew their solitude couldn't last forever. But for now, in this small cabin tucked away from the world, she was safe, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. The clear weather held for a few days, long enough to make the surrounding landscape passable, if still treacherous. Long enough, too, for word of Elias having taken someone in to travel across the scattered homesteads. The prairie community was small, isolated, and intensely wary of outsiders. And Elias, living alone and keeping to himself, was already an object of suspicion for some. They came on a clear, cold afternoon, two men on horseback, bundled against the chill, their faces grim and suspicious. Elias saw them coming from a distance and told her quietly, "Stay inside. Don't show yourself." His voice was calm, but his jaw was set. He met them outside, standing between them and the cabin door, a silent, unyielding barrier. She watched through a crack in the curtains, her heart pounding. The men were gruff, their voices carrying on the crisp air. They asked questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? What was his business taking in strays? Their tone was accusatory, laced with the fear and judgment of those who clung to their hard-won security and saw any unknown as a threat. Elias's responses were short, clipped. "She was lost. Near dead. I took her in. That's my business." He didn't elaborate, didn't offer explanations or apologies. He stood his ground, his arms crossed, his gaze level and unwavering. One of the men, a burly man with a mien set to his mouth, dismounted, taking a step towards the cabin. "We got a right to know who's settlin' in these parts. Could be anyone." Trouble. Elias shifted, just slightly, but the movement was enough. It spoke of coiled strength, of a willingness to defend his space, his quiet life, and the person he had taken in. He didn't reach for the rifle leaning against the cabin wall, but his stance made it clear he would if necessary. The air grew thick with tension. She watched, mesmerized, a strange mixture of fear and fierce loyalty rising within her. He was defending her, this man who barely knew her, against the harsh judgment of the world. And she would not hide any longer. With a sudden, decisive movement, she pulled the curtain wide and stood in the doorway, visible to the men. She met their stares, her own gaze steady, drawing on a reserve of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence, her defiant stand beside Elias, spoke volumes. She was not a victim, not just a lost girl anymore. She was here, she was with him, and they would face the world together. The men exchanged glances, surprised by her appearance, by her quiet resolve. The tension held for a moment longer. Then the burly man grunted, a sound of reluctant concession. They muttered something about keeping an eye and mounted their horses, riding away across the snow. Elias watched them go, his expression softening only slightly as they disappeared over a rise. He turned back to her, standing in the doorway. The look in his eyes was different now, not just watchful but acknowledging, respectful. It was a silent conversation, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them, forged in the storm and tested by the world's suspicion. She had chosen to stand by him, and he had chosen to stand for her. The moment was a quiet climax, not of violence, but of unity and defiant presence. The harshness of the prairie, the judgment of men, they were still there, but they no longer felt insurmountable. Not when faced together. The confrontation with the neighbors marked a turning point. It solidified the unspoken partnership between Elias and the woman he had saved, Sarah, as she finally offered her name one quiet evening by the fire. They were no longer just two solitary figures sharing a cabin out of necessity. They were two souls who had faced an external threat together and found unexpected strength in each other's presence. Sarah's initial vulnerability had been tempered by her experiences, her fear replaced by a quiet resilience. She moved with more purpose now, her contributions to the household chores becoming integral to their routine. She learned from Elias, watching how he read the weather, how he worked the land, how he handled the scarce resources with respect. He, in turn, seemed to open up, not in torrents of words, but in small gestures, sharing a piece of knowledge about the local plants, pointing out constellations in the vast night sky. His silence less guarded, more companionable. They still spoke little, their understanding existing in shared glances, the rhythm of their parallel tasks, the comfortable quiet that settled between them in the evenings. One day, as the snow began its slow retreat, revealing the muddy, brown earth beneath, Sarah stood outside, breathing the damp, earthy air. It smelled of thawing and renewal. Elias joined her, standing a respectful distance away. "Spring," he said, his voice softer than usual. It wasn't just a statement. It felt like an acknowledgement of the passage of time, of survival, of the future stretching ahead. She looked out at the endless land, no longer a place of terror, but a place of possibility. She had arrived here lost, empty, running from a past that had broken her. She had found shelter, not just from the storm, but from the world's cruelty and her own despair. And in finding shelter, she had found a quiet strength within herself, a dignity she hadn't known she possessed. Elias had not saved her in the way a hero saves a maiden in a storybook. He had simply offered a space, a time, and the quiet expectation that she, like the prairie itself, would find a way to endure and eventually, to bloom again. He had been the stoic protector, the steady anchor in the storm, but her transformation was her own. She was no longer the girl lost in the snow. She was a woman who had faced the storm, inside and out, and found her footing. The future was uncertain, the world still harsh and unforgiving, but she faced it now with a quiet resolve, standing not behind him, but beside him, ready to meet whatever came next, together. Their story was not one of rescue leading to dependence, but of shared survival leading to a quiet, enduring partnership, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit on the vast, indifferent canvas of the prairie.